What's up guys, Rotozap here. Today we're going to be going over all the different school strategies that I think are viable in the meta now, and not really so much going over like gear setups and deck setups with those strategies, or else this would be like a 3-hour long video, but more or less just kind of a description of like, okay, this is what the strategy is and this is kind of the idea behind it, so that if you guys are like, oh okay, that sounds intriguing, you can use those keywords and like you know what you're looking for in terms of like where to get inspiration from creating your gear setup and your deck setup. So you know, because with this update we got a pretty drastic change in the meta, very drastic change in the meta, and I think that some strategies kind of need to be retired, and then other ones are kind of viable now. So I think who better to start on than my balance, because as you guys know, I'm basically a balance main, if such a thing is possible. So balance got kind of hurt by this update in a lot of regards, but I think that there are 3 kind of strategies that we can be doing on balance right now, one of which is the Chimera strategy, which I made a long form video on, just going completely into detail about that strategy. If you haven't checked it out and you're interested, go ahead and do so. But anyway, so Chimera is definitely a viable strategy. It is kind of frustrating though, because you know, you really do need Shatter, or maybe make has Shatter, I don't know, because it's really kind of easy for your opponent to spam Aegis set shields against the Spirit Schools, and it can be kind of problematic, right? And then of course the other interesting strategy that kind of involves that is going to be an elemental blade stacking strategy. So instead of Chimera, we're using things like Spectral Blast, Nested Fury, and Hydra to be doing damage instead of Chimeras, the other Spectral Blast, the Spiritual Tribunal, and yeah, but that one also makes use of Science, so both of them can make use of Science, so that's kind of neat. But as far as like which one's better, I'm leaning towards Chimera just because people aren't really so much set to the spiritual schools as they are the elemental schools. Like most people still have Fire and Ice Ward or some kind of combination of those. So it's probably better to be doing the spirit version, but who knows, right? I certainly don't know because I haven't tested out the other version yet, the elemental version, but it seems kind of interesting, right? Definitely seems promising. But anyway, moving on to the third strategy. So the third strategy is going to be critical. So having like high critical and doing mostly balanced spells, like, you know, your normal hits and whatnot, and you know, kind of the way that balance was playing before. So I think that this definitely has its pros and cons. The pros are that your healing is really good, and healing in this meta is really important. The cons are that one of your, I would say, kind of not so great matchups, Ice, is able to steal your only heal unless you have the Cat Pet, which is like an instant heal. Or you could be doing what on the low. Okay, don't tell this to your friends, guys. We're going to keep this one on the low. But this particular spell right here, Sap Health, because balance is constantly putting up minions, this is kind of good. This is a kind of gas spell, especially when we put a Primordial on it. Where's a Primordial? Yeah, so, or I mean a Radical. When we put a Radical on it, turns it into a 650 heal for 1 pip. Not too shabby at all. So anyway, but if you'll notice, I didn't mention Nova, and I don't think it's a really viable strategy anymore. The problem with Nova is that it just doesn't do enough damage. Like 1200 damage is just not enough, and requires a ridiculous amount of setup, and often results in you tying because you're dying to your Nova backlash, or you just can't get your combo off and then you die because of that. You know, and then the other really big issue with Nova right now is that like you just don't have any options for like getting high Shadow Pit boosts, because you know you're gonna get out-shatted every single time by your opponent when you're doing the Nova strategy. So it's kind of problematic, but there's still hope for Nova. I think we'll talk about that later, but I'm not really seeing it on balance. Alright, moving on to life with an abrupt jump cut before I dwell on balance for too long, because that is definitely something I would do if I didn't stop myself. So life, I think, has really kind of, again, 3 strategies that are really viable right now. The first one is how they've been playing, like in the previous, like prior to update gameplay, where, you know, you just have a stupid high crit, right? You just have a lot of crit, and you're healing for a lot, and every single hit you're doing is critting, so it's like just madness, right? It's just crazy. So that's definitely something that I think they can still be doing. Another strategy is kind of not so much like a, I don't know if tank's the right word, because tanking is what I'm talking about next, but it's kind of just like having more health and really actually no critical, and instead just kind of focusing on blade stacking and things like that, and having much higher health than usual. I don't know if I already said that, but you know, you have high health, you have high resist, and you're kind of more of a tank. You take things a little slower. You play similar to an ice, I guess, is the best thing I can liken it to. And yeah, you just kind of gas your opponent with the fact that like they can't kill you before you can kill them, because you're like blading up and using spiny and shrike or something crazy like that. So, you know, I think that that's an option. The other third and final option is jading. Okay, and people, I think the majority, I had a Twitter poll, and right now it seems like most people are in favor of not having jades in 1v1s, but jading is technically, yes, it is an option. Do I think that having hour-long matches where if you're not a fire, myth, death, or storm, you can't even take them out, is that really fair? No, not really. I've given up so far 100 rank on my balance to jades, because balance can't kill jades. Ice cannot kill jades. Life cannot kill jades. And you may say, well, Rotozep, why don't you do your Chimera strategy and blade up and bleh? Because you can't. You can't do that, because they all have Maycast Enfeeble pets. So if you really did want to try to blade up like crazy and just gas them with something, good luck, because their pet's going to use Maycast Enfeeble, and every single turn that you use a blade, they can use a shield. So does that really work? No, not really. The only schools that can actually beat Jades on a consistent basis if they play well are schools like Fire, Storm, possibly Myth, and Death. So, but I just think that the fact that 3 out of the 7 schools are completely shut out from playing against this particular strategy is ludicrous. Extremely unhealthy for the meta. But that being said, this isn't a video essay on Jades. This is talking about strategies, right? And jading is a strategy, so it's not a strategy. It's not a strategy, but it is something that you can be doing. Sadness. So anyway, if you're a Jade, basically what you do is you spam blades, and you know, you usually have like a Fortify Brace pet, so you constantly have an aura up that's preventing more damage, and you have really, really high heal boost, and yeah, you just kind of do that. You just sit around, you don't really do much, you just constantly shield, and you know, probably keep a minion out and stuff like that. And as far as hits go, you do play minion killers typically, so that your opponent can't get a minion out, but you know, outside of that, you're really not working towards a kill. If your opponent goes AFK against you, you have stuff to kill them with, but you're not really like working towards a kill during the game, if that makes any sense. You're kind of just trying to like annoy the crap out of your opponent until they eventually flee or they go AFK, so that, you know, while they're AFK you can kill them. But I don't really recommend that, but I know for a fact, as long as you're not hitting good fires and good storms and stuff like that, you're going to be gaining rank. So that's just how it is right now. I'm not a fan of it, but that is a strategy. I got to talk about it, right? So moving on to Death. So Death actually is one of the really big winners from this update, because they didn't have a ton of stuff actually nerfed, and they got a lot of buffs. Like the buffs to drains were, first of all, a long time needed thing, but second of all, it's just really great. It opens up a new playstyle, right? So Death, I think, is going to continue to play in the way that it has. So I'm going to say that there's really only, like, okay, we'll say 2 because I have a cheeky response. I have a cheeky other strategy that Death can do as well besides what they've been doing. But really for Death, if you want to play Death and you don't want it to get too complicated, keep playing it how Death was already being played. Just aggressive blade stacking and working towards either being able to Scion or Deadly Minotaur or things like that, right? All these are really good options. Death is still a phenomenal school, and I mean, really, they got better after this update. They definitely went up the tier ranks in schools because they're really good now. And of course, because you have drains, that gives you another good option against schools that heal, or it gives you a really good option against schools that can't heal because you're able to heal and they're not. And the really crazy thing is that drains are not affected by Doom. So if you want to prevent someone from healing, you can put up Doom and you're still able to heal because drains don't get impacted by Doom. So that's a really cool thing that Death can do. So which again makes them even more viable in this meta because being able to block your opponent off from healing is really strong. So I think that that's kind of the first strategy, is just playing Death how it was originally, but maybe packing in some Vons or vampires or possibly ghouls in your main deck, just to kind of beef things up a little bit, kind of make things a little more interesting, give yourself more draining options besides just Scion. And yeah, no, Death is definitely in a cool place here. And then of course the other strategy is actually Nova for Death, because Nova for balance it was originally kind of the best school to be doing a Nova strategy on. But honestly, my opinion has kind of shifted towards Death being the best school to do it on, because you have access to things like Juju and Nightbringer plays with feints and stuff, and you don't have to have a gazillion pips to do those Nightbringer like feint plays and stuff like that. Whereas with balance, you have to have a lot of pips. Like if you're going into Nova on a balance now, you have to have a lot of pips because you're going to have to do some crazy comboing to actually let that Nova one-shot. So Death doesn't really have to have that many pips because most of the utility spells that we're going to be using for a Nova strategy actually come from Death. So that's always cool. So I think that is actually going to be something that you might start seeing. I know there's a couple people already that do a Nova strategy on their Death, and they've been having pretty good success with it. So I think that it's definitely something that is worth mentioning for all the Nova lovers such as myself out there. But next, we're going to move on to Myth. Alright, so Myth is another school that I would definitely call one of the winners of this update, because Baba Yaga now has, or Witch's House, Baba Yaga, Witch's House Call has crazy utility now because it does a crap ton of damage and summons a really powerful minion. So that's already great. And then of course, Mystic Colossus got a crazy buff. So, you know, now it pierces a shield before it actually hits, which is crazy because that means if your opponent doesn't Aegis a shield before they put it on, they're leaving themselves open to a Mystic. And couple that with the fact that Myth easily has, like, in my opinion, just the fastest to set up and just the most simple to set up Scion. It really makes Myth a force to be reckoned with because all it takes is 2 turns, right? All they need to do, put on 2 sets of sunblocks, and they're good to go. And the really scary part about Scion, too, is that it doesn't need 4 stun blocks on you. It needs 3. So even if you think like you can kind of cheese them and like stun them to get them out of the Scion thing, you can't do that. And the other really interesting thing is that I'm not 100% sure on this, but I'm pretty sure that Scion actually has 2 conditions. So it's either if you have 3 stun blocks on or your opponent is currently stunned. So if your opponent's currently stunned, then that also means you get to use Scion, which is crazy. I'm not 100% sure if that's how it works, but I'm pretty sure if you read the card, that's what it says. So that's kind of insane. Easily by far what I think is the easiest to set up Scion. But yeah, Myth is definitely a force to be reckoned with. Definitely a top tier school right now. As far as strategies go, I kind of have already been talking about it. Like Myth really hasn't changed in terms of like how they play. You know, you're still gonna want to like be annoying with the little minion and stuff like that, but you just get more tools, right? So now Baba Yaga comparatively is a much better spell than it was before, and you also get access to Mystic, which is crazy, right? And of course, some people are upset that Orthrus was taken away, but really, I think in most situations, Mystic is actually just better, because it is an AoE too, so it can be used to take out minions, which is even more broken. So yeah, I think for all intents and purposes, in the way that people were using Orthrus in a 1v1, Mystic is kind of just better. But that's, you know, that's a hot take, right? But yeah, no, Myth is in a really great spot. You're going to continue to play Myth in the same way that you were originally, except for you get some new tools, new tricks of the trade to be using at your disposal. But let's move on to Ice. Alright, so Ice is another school that I don't think changes that much. Weaver was nerfed, but really not that much. It just means like Fire and Ice are kind of in the same position with the two main spells that got nerfed. It's really just meaning that you can't use it as effectively as a defensive move now, because Weaver before could be used both as an offensive play and as a defensive play. Like, there was a lot of situations where a Weaver into a set shield was not even a terrible move just because of the shield that you get afterwards. So that was crazy, right? But now it's less effective as a defensive play, so I guess that's changed. And a few of their other spells damage got nerfed, like the base damage of the spell got nerfed. But besides that, I mean, Ice is still Ice, so I don't think a whole lot changes. I think that Ice is kind of going more in the direction now of being similar to Death, to where they're just going to be like aggressively blade stacking and chipping you down with frostbites and weavers and things like that. But I think that what's done, we're not going to see anymore, is this crazy playstyle of like Shrike into Weaver into getting another Shadow Pip into Weaver and just Weaver, 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 Weaver. I don't think we're going to see that anymore, but I mean, in fact, a lot of the Ices that I've played against haven't even gone into Shrike because they just haven't needed it, because they're running more offensive stats now. So yeah, I think that that's kind of really where Ice is heading. I think they're just kind of heading towards a more aggressive play style, more aggressive blade stacking into overtimes and shadow spells kind of play style. So very similar to Death, right? Very similar to Death, except I'd say Death probably uses Death Minnow more than Poison, but you know, you get what I'm saying. It's probably a decent comparison to make. So not much to say about Ice. I think Ice is still a really good school. They're just getting a little more aggressive with how they're blading. Alright, so next up we got Storm, and honestly, I don't think a whole lot has changed about Storm either. There are still two ways to play Storm. You could play it on a Glass Cannon build, or you can play it more on a Tinky build. But I think that we're going to see a really sharp decline in the Glass Cannon build, because, you know, every school, including Storm, got a lot of their damage nerfed in terms of like the base damage of their spells. So I don't think a Glass Cannon build is going to be as effective anymore. Might be wrong on that for Storm, but I don't see it being as effective anymore. So I think they're going to turn more towards the having more health and having more resistance, because honestly, like, Storm Scion is crazy right now. Like, really crazy. Like, the base damage of that spell is absurd. And the condition is pretty easy as well, because Storm has so many different options to get blades off of your opponents, including a spell called Enfeeble that just directly takes every blade off. So even if you don't have to, like, even if you're not doing a Leviathan or a Catch of the Day or whatever, you still have Enfeeble. So it's crazy. But yeah, no, Storm's pretty good, actually. I think Storm, before the update, was like probably close to last, if not last, in the tier list. But I think they're kind of a mid-tier school now, because what King's Isle did for Storm is they kind of took away some of their utility, but just made their damage like ridiculous. So Storm is really good. Storm is really good. I used to not like Storm at all, but I can admit that Storm is pretty good in this current meta. So I think for the Glass Cannon build, Glass Cannon setup, it's just not going to be as popular because the meta is kind of slowing down. But the tank version of Storm, where you're in, you know, just maybe doing some chip damage and probably working towards a Scion kill, or not even, like, even if you don't have the ability to Scion, if you have all those pips, you can do crazy stuff with like Thunderbird into Rusalka, or, you know, Storm Beetle into Scion. I don't even know, right? There's so many different combos you can still do on a Storm. I think it's a pretty solid school. But those are the two main play styles that I think you can do for it. Alright, last and certainly not least, we have Fire. And Fire obviously took one of the larger nerfs as well. But that's not to say that they're like a bad school or anything anymore, because I mean, think about how much people overreacted when Fire Beetle was banned from PvP. Like, the TC Fire Beetle was banned from PvP. People, like, they went way overboard with overreacting and thought that Fire was going to be trash now. And Fire ended up still being, like, the best school. So, you know, yeah. So, I think even after this Ifrit thing, it's going to be kind of a similar story. I don't think that they're the best school anymore. I think that they've definitely dropped in the tier list. But I keep saying the word tier list. If you guys want to see me do an updated tier list, I will also make that. But anyway, so I think that Fire just kind of has to change their playstyle somewhat. Just somewhat. Because I think that the Fire Elf spam strategy isn't going to be as effective anymore. But the trap stack into Scion strategy is still going to be very viable. And I know this for a fact because I played a Fire and he had, it might have been 3 sets of traps on me and a wildfire bubble, and I had a set shield on, and, you know, I have decent resist. Like, I had, I think, 60 resist, and this man one-shot me at full health with a Scion, in Shrike, obviously, but he was in Shrike, and through a set shield, it literally one-shot me. So I think that Fire trap stack strat is going to still be definitely a thing, and it's still really, really powerful. But the only thing with Fire that's not going to be a thing anymore is going to be just, like, ridiculous stuff. Like, just constantly spamming Ifrit into FFA or FFA into Ifrit. And yeah, that's not really going to be a thing anymore. But Fire is still a good school, and I think that their trap stack strat is still a really viable option, because in the meta, there's not really any way to take off traps right now. There just isn't. So I think that that's definitely something that works in Fire's favor. Like, all these other schools typically have to be blade stacking, but blades can get countered with Enfeeble, whereas trap stacking, that really can't be countered with anything. I mean, technically shields, but what happens if you pierce the shield or you shatter the shields or whatever? So I think that Fire is still in a pretty decent spot. But that's really it, guys. That's all 7 schools. That is all the viable strategies that I think are going to present themselves in this meta. So if you guys enjoyed today, be sure to let me know. And if I missed a strategy, if you're like, man, I got this crazy underground strategy that you didn't talk about, but I think is going to be really viable, I'd love to hear it in the comments below. But yeah, that's all I've really got, guys. I don't even know. I don't know what I have a pretty interesting idea what I'm going to do for my next video. It's going to be kind of the start of a series. I just need other WizTuber support on it, which a little hint as to what it could be. But yeah, so I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your day. Stay tuned for the next vid. And that's all I've got. Rotozap out. Peace.